It's 2 a.m. You're staring at the ceiling, wide awake. Your heart isn't racing, nothing is wrong, but your mind is running and you feel broken for it. You reach for your phone, you check the time, you do the math on how many hours of sleep you have left, and the number makes it worse. You've been told this is a disorder, a malfunction, something to fix with an app, a pill, or a podcast about sleep hygiene. But the real answer is far stranger. For most of human history, waking up in the middle of the night wasn't a disorder at all. It was Tuesday. Your ancestors didn't sleep the way you do, not even close. And once you understand how they actually slept, the way your own brain behaves at 2 a.m. will never look broken again. Start with a simple question. What did people do before electric light? You probably picture them going to bed at sunset and sleeping straight through until dawn, like a single long exhale. That image feels obvious. It also happens to be wrong. The historian A. Roger Ekirch spent over a decade digging through diaries, court records, and medical texts from pre-industrial Europe. What he found was a pattern that shows up again and again in letters, sermons, and even legal testimony. People described a first sleep and a second sleep. They went to bed a few hours after dusk. They slept for 3 or 4 hours. Then they woke up. Not in a panic, not checking a clock, because clocks barely mattered. They simply woke and stayed awake for an hour or two in the middle of the night. What did they do with that time? Some prayed, some talked quietly with a spouse, some got up and tended the fire or stepped outside to check the animals. Ekirch found records of people using this window to think, to plan, even to have sex, because the mind in this state is calm, unguarded, and strangely clear. Then, when the wakeful hour passed, they drifted into a second sleep and woke again near dawn. 2 sleeps, 1 night. This wasn't a quirk of one country or one century. It shows up across cultures, across continents, in texts stretching back to antiquity. Homer describes characters waking in the first sleep. Medieval physicians wrote remedies meant to be taken at first sleep. The pattern was so common that nobody bothered to explain it, the way nobody today explains what lunch means. Everyone already knew. So why don't you sleep that way now? Here's where the science gets interesting. In the early 1990s, the psychiatrist Thomas Weir ran an experiment at the National Institute of Mental Health. He took a group of volunteers and, instead of exposing them to normal modern light, he put them on a schedule of 14 hours of darkness a night. 14 hours. Roughly what a household would experience in winter before electric light existed. No screens, no streetlights leaking through the window, just darkness for most of the night. Within about a month, something shifted. The volunteers stopped sleeping in one long block. Instead, they settled into 2 distinct phases of sleep, separated by 1 to 3 hours of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. Sound familiar? Weir had accidentally recreated the exact rhythm Ekirch had found buried in centuries-old diaries. Different century, different continent, different method entirely. Same biological pattern, emerging the moment modern light was removed. That's the twist most people never hear. Segmented sleep isn't a historical curiosity. It's not something your ancestors settled for because they lacked better options. It may be closer to your factory setting. Modern light and modern schedules didn't cure a broken sleep pattern. They erased a normal one and replaced it with something your biology never fully signed up for. Why would evolution build a brain that wakes up in the middle of the night at all? Wouldn't unbroken sleep be safer? Actually, no. Think about where your ancestors slept for most of human history. Not in a locked bedroom with a deadbolt, in the open, or in a shelter with a thin wall of branches, animal hide, or woven grass between them and everything that wanted to eat them. A predator doesn't announce itself on a schedule. Neither does a rival group, a shifting fire, or a sick child who needs checking on. A brain that drops into 8 uninterrupted hours of unconsciousness, no matter what, is a brain that gets caught off guard. The anthropologist Carol Worthman has studied sleep across dozens of small-scale societies still living without electricity today, from the Hadza of Tanzania to groups in South America. Her research shows something consistent. Sleep in these communities is flexible, socially embedded, and frequently broken into segments through the night. People sleep near others. They wake when someone stirs, when a child cries, when the fire needs feeding. Sleep isn't a private, sealed-off event. It's porous, shared, and alert to its environment, because for nearly all of human history, staying alert to your environment was the difference between waking up and not waking up at all. This is the deep mirror hiding underneath your 2 a.m. wakefulness. Your brain isn't malfunctioning when it pulls you out of sleep in the dark hours. It's running software that is, conservatively, a few 100,000 years old. That software assumes a long night, a permeable environment, and a body that periodically checks in with its surroundings before settling back down. It has no idea that you live behind a locked door, 3 floors up, with a smoke detector doing the job your ears used to do. There's a second layer to this too, and it involves your hormones, not just your ancestors' predators. Researchers studying melatonin, the hormone that helps regulate your sleep cycle, have found that its release in modern humans is compressed and delayed compared to what would occur under natural pre-industrial light exposure. Artificial light in the evening, especially the blue-toned light from screens, suppresses melatonin and pushes your internal clock later. So you're not just missing the long dark night your ancestors had. You're actively signaling to your brain every evening that it isn't nighttime yet, right up until you switch off the light and expect 8 unbroken hours to begin instantly. Your ancestors eased into the dark over hours. You slam into it in seconds. Put those two things together and the 2 a.m. wake-up stops looking like a personal failure. It starts looking like the predictable output of an ancient, finely tuned system, operating in an environment it was never designed for. The wakefulness itself isn't the problem. The panic about the wakefulness is the problem, and that panic is a distinctly modern invention. Kirch's research turned up something else worth sitting with. In those old diaries and sermons, the middle of the night waking hour wasn't dreaded. It was, in some accounts, treated as a small gift, a quiet space for reflection, prayer, or conversation tucked between 2 halves of the night. Nobody was reaching for a glowing rectangle to check how many hours of failure remained. There was no failure to measure, because there was no expectation of a single unbroken block in the first place. So the next time you wake at 2 a.m. and your mind starts running, here's the strange comfort in all of this. You are not defective. You are not behind schedule. You are, in that exact moment, doing something remarkably close to what nearly every human being who ever lived also did, night after night, for hundreds of thousands of years. The difference is they expected it and used it. You've been taught to fear it. Consider what this means for how you've been treating yourself. Somewhere along the way, a single word took over the conversation about sleep. Insomnia. It sounds clinical. It sounds permanent. It sounds like something happening to you, rather than something your body is simply built to do under the right conditions. But insomnia, as it's diagnosed today, is defined by difficulty sleeping according to a modern, industrial expectation. 8 hours, 1 block, lights off, lights on, nothing in between. That expectation is barely 200 years old. Your nervous system is not 200 years old. It is built on a timeline measured in hundreds of thousands of years, shaped by campfires, shifting weather, and the low murmur of other people breathing nearby. Think about the invention that actually changed this. Not medicine, not psychology, a light bulb. Thomas Edison didn't just invent a way to see in the dark. He, and the decades of infrastructure that followed him, effectively rewired the default human night. Streetlights extended the evening. Factory shifts demanded a single, predictable block of rest so workers could return refreshed and on time. Segmented sleep, with its meandering hour of candlelit reflection, doesn't fit neatly into a punch clock economy. So it quietly disappeared, not because your biology changed, but because your environment did, and did so within the span of a few generations. 200 years is nothing on an evolutionary clock. It's a blink. Your body didn't get the memo. There's a cultural piece to this too, one that's easy to miss if you only look at Europe. In many parts of the world, undisturbed by industrial light for most of their history, flexible and segmented rest never fully vanished in the first place. Communal sleeping arrangements, daytime naps, and multiple shorter rest periods remain woven into daily life in various regions. What outsiders sometimes label as inefficient sleep habits are, from a different angle, simply the default human pattern that Western industrial culture happened to override first and hardest. The idea that everyone, everywhere, should sleep in one continuous 8-hour block turns out to be less of a biological rule and more of a recent cultural export. So what actually happens, moment by moment, when you wake at 2 a.m. under this ancient framework? Your body isn't panicking. It's checking in. A brief rise in cortisol, a shift out of deep sleep, a period of quiet alertness. In your ancestors' world, that alertness had a job. Listen for movement near the shelter. Notice if the fire has died down. Feel whether the child beside you is warm enough. In your world, that same alertness has nothing to check. No fire, no predator, no task waiting in the dark. So it turns inward instead and finds your to-do list, your anxieties, your unresolved conversations from the day. Because an alert mind with nothing external to monitor will always go looking for something to focus on. The mechanism hasn't failed. It's simply aimed at the wrong target, because the target it was built for no longer exists. This reframes the entire modern anxiety around sleep. You've likely tried to force your way back into unconsciousness during that waking hour. Phone dimmed, eyes shut tighter, willing your brain to stop. E. Kirch's diaries suggest a different approach entirely. The people who left those records didn't fight the wakefulness. They used it. A little reading by candlelight, a quiet conversation, a few minutes of simply lying still with an unhurried mind, trusting that the second sleep would come because it always had before. There was no dread attached to the waking because there was no expectation of a single unbroken night to begin with. That single shift, expecting one long sleep instead of 2 shorter ones, might be doing more damage to how you feel about your nights than the waking itself ever could. Your ancestors didn't fight that hour of darkness, they lived inside it. It's 2 a.m. You're staring at the ceiling, wide awake. Nothing is wrong. This isn't a malfunction, it's a memory.